There's a version of Australian history that begins with ships sailing into a bright blue harbor in 1788. It tells us a new nation was born. But that story leaves out a question that changes everything. Born on whose land? Because when the British ships arrived, Australia was not a blank space waiting to be discovered. It was already alive. Across the continent and the islands of the Torres Strait were hundreds of distinct peoples, speaking many languages, following laws, trading across vast distances, raising children, caring for country, and carrying stories older than most nations on Earth. Then strangers stepped ashore and made a decision that still echoes today. They looked at a living homeland and declared it empty. That lie had a name: Terra, Nullius, land belonging to no one. And once that lie was accepted, almost anything could be done. Land could be fenced. Water holes could be seized. Sacred places could be torn apart. Families could be pushed aside. People defending their own homes could be called dangerous. This is not a story about a people who vanished. They did not vanish. They were attacked, displaced, controlled, and silenced. But they endured. They resisted. They carry their names, their memories, and their connection to country through things that were meant to break them. To understand what British colonization did to Indigenous Australians, we have to begin with what was already here. Before the flags, before the prisons, before the farms and the fences, there was country. Country does not simply mean land. It can mean the place that holds your family, your ancestors, your food, your language, your responsibilities, your ceremony, and your identity. It is the river where your grandparents taught you to fish, the hill where a story is remembered, the ground where your dead are buried, the seasons that tell you when to gather, hunt, burn, move, and return. For many Indigenous communities, country was not something a person owned like a chair or a house. Country was something you belonged to. And that is why the arrival of the British was not only a change of government. It was the beginning of a deep wound. On January 26, 1788, the first fleet arrived at Sydney Cove. The British came with convicts, soldiers, supplies, weapons, and a plan to build a colony. They did not come with a treaty agreed with the people already living there. They did not ask the Eora people for permission to take their harbor, their shores, or their food grounds. At first, the newcomers were few. But even a small settlement could cause enormous harm. They cut trees. They cleared land. They took fish and animals. They changed access to water. Their livestock trampled places that had fed people for generations. Their disease moved faster than their ships. Smallpox, influenza, and other illnesses brought by Europeans tore through communities that had no protection against them. Families watched people become sick and die with little warning. Elders, parents, children, knowledge holders, hunters, healers, people whose memories held the map of life were lost. Imagine watching the people who know your songs, your family history, your sacred places disappear one by one. And while communities were grieving, the colony kept growing. That is one of the darkest parts of this story. Colonization was not one moment. It was not one battle. It was a machine that kept moving. A farm became a settlement. A settlement became a town. A town demanded more land. More land meant more fences, more animals, more soldiers, more violence. And every step forward for the colony meant another place where Indigenous people were told, in one way or another, to move. But where were they supposed to go? Their country was not replaceable. When Indigenous people resisted, they were not attacking a foreign land. They were defending home. One of the first great names of resistance was Pemulwuy, a warrior of the Aboriginal people, near what is now Sydney. Soon after the first fleet arrived, he saw the colony spreading over the lands of his people. He fought against it. He was wounded, hunted, captured, escaped, and kept resisting. To the British, he was described as a threat. To his people, he was defending country. In 1802, Pemulwuy was shot and killed. His head was cut off and sent to England. Think about that for a moment. Even after killing him, the colonizers wanted possession of him. That act tells us something important. This was not only about land. It was about power. It was about sending a message. Resist, and you will be treated as less than human. But Pemulwuy was not alone. Across the continent, indigenous men and women fought, negotiated, escaped, protected children, shared warnings, and tried to hold their communities together. These conflicts are often called the frontier wars. They were not one war with one battlefield. They were many struggles across many decades in many places. There was also a legal trick at the heart of the expansion. British authorities did not treat indigenous nations as nations with a right to make agreements. Unlike some other parts of the British Empire, most of Australia was taken without a treaty. The colonizers acted as though there was no political order here to recognize. That made resistance easier to punish. When a settler's animals destroyed a food source or a fence blocked a pathway, indigenous people were expected to accept it. When they did not, the colonial authorities often answered with force. In some regions, special police units were created to push the frontier outward and suppress Aboriginal resistance. The result was a terrible imbalance. One side had rifles, prisons, courts, written laws, and the power to call for reinforcements. The other side had deep knowledge of the land, courage, and the desperate need to protect family and country. That does not mean indigenous people were powerless. Far from it. They used the bush to move, hide, warn one another, and strike back. They watched the newcomers closely. They understood that this was not a short visit. It was an occupation that intended to stay. And once the colony had taken the land, it began trying to control the people who remained on it. For many families, every new road, station, or township was another warning. The world their grandparents knew was being closed around them, and the pressure would only become more relentless with time. For a long time, much of this was softened, hidden, or left out of the national story. People spoke proudly about pioneers. They spoke of brave settlers carving out farms in a hard land. But far less was said about the people already there, the people who lost their homes so those farms could exist. And when the violence is mentioned, it is sometimes spoken of as if it was distant, unclear, or unavoidable. But for the families living through it, there was nothing distant about it. There were armed raids. There were killings. There were massacres. There were people driven from water sources and hunting grounds. There were children left without parents. There were parents left searching for children. In Tasmania, the pressure became especially brutal. As British settlements spread, Aboriginal Tasmanians were pushed from their lands, attacked, and exposed to devastating disease. In 1830, colonial authorities organized what became known as the Black Line, a huge human chain of soldiers, police, settlers, and convicts moving across the island in an attempt to capture and remove Aboriginal people. Picture it. Thousands of men moving through the bush, trying to close a net around people whose only crime was refusing to leave their own land. The Black Line did not capture the numbers the authorities wanted, but its meaning was terrifying. It showed that an entire colonial system could turn itself into a weapon against a small number of indigenous families. And still, the taking of land continued. This is where the story becomes harder to understand if we think only in maps. A map can show a red line around a farm. It can show a road or a railway. It cannot show what was broken when a family was cut off from a river. It cannot show the fear of walking near a place that now belonged to someone else. It cannot show the ache of being treated like a trespasser on the land that shaped your ancestors. For the British, land could be measured, sold, and inherited. For Indigenous Australians, taking country could mean taking the foundation under life itself. Then came another layer of control. In many places, Aboriginal people were pushed or forced onto missions, reserves, and stations. These places were often described as protection. But protection can become a cage when someone else controls where you live, where you work, who you can marry, whether you can travel, and whether you can speak your own language. Some people were separated from their families. Some were punished for practicing culture. Some were expected to work for little or no pay. Some had their wages controlled or withheld. Some were told that their ways of life were shameful, backward, or doomed. The message was cruelly simple. To survive in the new Australia, you were expected to become less like yourself. Languages were especially dangerous to a system that wanted control. A language carries more than words. It carries jokes, kinship, place names, songs, ways of seeing the world. Silence a language, and you do not just silence sound. You weaken the bridge between generations. Yet even then, people found ways to remember. A grandmother whispered words to a child. A family held on to a story. A song was protected. A name survived. A ceremony was practiced quietly. What looked like silence from the outside was often survival happening in secret. But the colonial system went further. It reached for the children. For decades, government laws, policies, and officials removed Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander children from their families. Some were taken because authorities claimed they needed to be saved. Some were taken because officials wanted them raised away from their culture. Some were sent to institutions, foster homes, or were placements far from their communities. These children became known as the stolen generations. The words are simple. The reality is not. A child can be taken in a single day. A mother may wake up thinking her child is safe. Then an official arrives. A car appears. There is paperwork she cannot control. There may be promises that the child will return. Then the child is gone. For some, there was no goodbye. Imagine being too young to understand why you have been separated from the people you love. Imagine being told not to speak your language. Imagine growing up without knowing the place you came from, the name of your grandparents, or the stories that should have been yours. This was not a side effect of colonization. It was a policy of separation. The pain did not end when those children became adults. Many spent years searching for family. Some found relatives after decades. Some never did. Some carried memories that were incomplete, broken by fear, distance, and silence. The loss traveled forward. Children grew up without parents. Parents grew old without children. Communities lost language, knowledge, and connection. That is what people mean when they speak about intergenerational trauma. It does not mean Indigenous people are trapped in the past. It means the past was not allowed to stay in the past. A law can be repealed. A mission can close. A government can apologize. But no apology can give a person back the childhood they lost. No speech can return the first language that was beaten out of someone. No ceremony can fully replace the years of family spent apart. And yet, there is another truth hidden inside this painful history. The British did not succeed in what their system tried to do. They did not erase Indigenous Australians. They did not erase every language. They did not erase every story. They did not erase the right of people to remember where they come from. Across Australia today, communities are rebuilding what was attacked. Elders are teaching young people language. Families are tracing records to reconnect stolen relatives. Cultural knowledge is being carried forward. People are returning to country. Artists, writers, activists, rangers, teachers, and leaders are making sure that the old lie does not get the final word. And that old lie is still worth naming. Terra Nullius was not simply an old legal phrase. It was a way of making people invisible so their land could be taken. It said, in effect, that a continent full of human beings, laws, languages, and responsibilities belonged to nobody. In 1992, the High Court of Australia rejected that idea in the Pemulwuy decision. The court recognized that native title could exist under Australian law. It was a major legal turning point, but the decision did not undo 2 centuries of loss. It did not rebuild every family. It did not bring back every language. It did not return every sacred place. It did not erase the gap between what Australia likes to say about itself and what many Indigenous families have lived through. So why does this history matter now? Because a country cannot truly understand itself by looking only at the buildings it razed. It also has to look at the homes it destroyed. It cannot celebrate courage while refusing to name the courage of people who defended their land against impossible odds. It cannot speak of fairness while avoiding the truth of children taken from their mothers. And it cannot heal by pretending that the wound was small. The uncomfortable truth is that modern Australia was built through colonization. That meant land dispossession, violence, racism, and policies designed to break connection between Indigenous people and country. But the deeper truth is this. The story did not end with destruction. It continued in resistance. It continued in every family that kept a memory alive, in every child learning words their grandparents were forbidden to speak, in every elder who refused to let country be forgotten, in every person who says, "We are still here." That sentence may be the most powerful answer to colonization. We are still here, not as a symbol, not as a footnote, not as a vanished people trapped in old photographs. Here, living, speaking, remembering, rebuilding. British colonization caused terrible damage to Indigenous Australians. It took lives, land, languages, children, and security. It tried to replace ancient belonging with fences, laws, and silence. But it could not destroy the people themselves. And perhaps that is the truth Australia must keep facing. Not that Indigenous Australians disappeared, but that against everything meant to make them disappear, they survived. Do you think this part of Australian history is taught honestly enough? Share your thoughts respectfully in the comments. And subscribe for more powerful, overlooked stories from Australia's past.